Vicor Teleconstruction, a leading provider of wireless infrastructure. Elevating the industry by elevating our offerings, our employees, and our quality of service. We stop at nothing to reach the most desirable solution in an intensely technical and calculated work environment. Vicor will continue to grow, offering our industry-leading services in an ever-expanding footprint in order to better serve our current and potential clients and their customers. Our commitment to bring the highest quality work and integrity to our customers is and will always be our #1 goal. The world is constantly evolving. So are we. Vicor Teleconstruction. Dedication to elevation.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Roberts. I'm a volunteer here with ENTELEC Association. I'd like to thank you for taking time to come by this late morning in Technology Theater #2 to attend the presentation of OnGo in oil and gas segments, use cases and deployments. We have Alan Ewing and Kurt Jacobs. Alan is an executive director of the OnGo Alliance and industry consortium of nearly 200 wireless and telecom organizations who believe that 3GPP-based solutions in a 3.5 gigahertz band utilizing shared spectrum can enable both in-building and outdoor coverage and capacity expansion at a massive scale. Kurt has over 20 years of emerging communication technologies development and system development experience. For JMA, he leads solutions and ecosystem development activities for mobile connectivity in the enterprise, industrial, government, and large venue markets. He is an active contributor and advisor to numerous industry technology alliances and consortiums to include the Alliance for Telecommunication Industry Solutions, Cbrs Alliance, FCC, and other 5G initiatives for smart city, smart buildings, connected car, IoT, and UAS. Kurt's previous companies include NEC and technology startups in the enterprise communications market. He recently retired from a 30-year active and reserve duty career as a U.S. Navy officer, serving in numerous global assignments. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate the introduction. As mentioned, I'm Alan Ewing, the Executive Director of the OnGo Alliance. My job for you today is to help set the stage for the really interesting part, which is the use case for oil and gas that my colleague here from JMA, who is impersonating Kurt Jacobs, but you'll learn more about that here in a few moments. But just to give you some context about what this is all about and help set the stage, give you some of the baseline information, some of the acronyms, some of the language that we use around what we're doing when we talk about CBRS. Many of you are familiar with this, but just to level set, CBRS runs as a 3-tiered spectrum sharing rubric. There's 150 megahertz of spectrum run between 3.55 and 3.7 gigahertz. The 3 tiers we refer to as tier 1 are the incumbents. The incumbents include primarily the US Navy. That is the big one. That's the one that we worry about, that we do sensing for, that we make sure to stay out of the way of so they can do their jobs. There are some other things that are considered incumbents, including fixed satellite services, the receiving stations, also ground-based radars. There's also the wireless internet service providers that were operating under Part 90. Those are all incumbents. They have primary use of the band. They're the ones that we worry about and watch for. When it comes to CBRS and the spectrum sharing, the next 2 tiers are where we really enter into the picture. You'll see this term priority access license, or PAL as the acronym is what's thrown around. PAL, basically, there are 7 licenses per US county. So that auction took place back in September of last year. And about it's 95, 98% of the licenses were purchased as part of the auction. Any one entity could own 4 licenses in a county, and that has now been finalized. The frequency assignments, the mechanisms to run the PAL part of the system are effectively completed. The entire band is potentially also useful in this, what we call general authorized access. And what general authorized access is, if nobody else is using it, neither the incumbents nor the PAL owners, the band is basically open for use. The only thing that we have to make sure of in the mechanism of using the band is that when a base station is enabled, when a base station is stood up, that base station has to have a connection to a spectrum access system. So that spectrum access system is effectively the traffic cop. They're the ones that make sure that your channel is not interfering with somebody else. It's not interfering with a PAL owner, or a PAL's not, has the priority, or if the incumbents are in play, that they're making the band available for them. So that's really what we're talking about here. If a PAL is not in use, if one of those auctioned licenses is not in use, the spectrum either reverts to general authorized access use. It can be used if it's not being used by the PAL, but also the PAL owners now have the ability to sublease their licenses through a number of mechanisms to other users. So if, for example, I own Dallas County, where I'm from, and I'm not using all of Dallas County, I can sublease a portion of that to some other user, and they can enjoy the rights as a PAL user. They can have that second tier access and accessibility. So when it comes to use cases, when you talk about use cases, of course, here, very, very keen on discussing oil and gas, energy, et cetera. But really the limited, there is no limitation when we talk about use cases for CBRS. When we look at CBRS and we talk about OnGo in particular, we're talking about LTE, or we're talking about the coming 5G and R technologies. So if you're familiar with this space, well, the acronym that's used is 3GPP. They're the standards body that drives all of the LTE and 5G and R development. So when we talk about OnGo, it's shared spectrum using these 3GPP based technologies. You see up here just a short list. It's not meant to be all-inclusive or exclusive. It's just to sort of give you a sense of the kinds of things that we're able to do. So you'll see things like fixed wireless broadband. So out in rural areas, this is a great way to deliver Wi-Fi or to deliver internet service to folks that may not otherwise be able to get it. So if you don't have fiber, if you don't have cable, if you don't have DSL, whatever, this is an alternative potentially for you as a customer. Mobile capacity augmentation. This is a big deal for the carriers. Carriers are very interested in this band as well. So the Verizons, AT&T, T-Mobiles, et cetera, if they want to add extra capacity to their networks, CBRS is a great way to do that. So many of the phones that are sold today, and probably the phone in your pocket, if it's less than 2 years old, supports the CBRS band. So already you may be using CBRS without even realizing it because your carrier is augmenting their spectrum with the CBRS spectrum. Another is the alternative mobile footprint. This is again where you think about a municipal operator. So City of Tucson is a great example. Tucson, Arizona, the CIO there is how do we provide internet service to our citizens? Another thing is school districts. During the COVID days, how do we keep kids connected that weren't otherwise connected? So this was a great way to provide internet service so that the kids who were having to do distance learning would then have a mechanism to take care of that. The nice thing about a private LTE network in that particular instance is the school could actually run the network and make sure to only provide access to the kinds of websites that are beneficial for education. So other types of websites you didn't want the kids surfing, you could basically prevent them from getting to it. And then only things that would be beneficial for them as students would be accessible. So a lot of nice control from that perspective to make sure it's used properly and for the right things. Other use cases, private LTE, so industrial settings. This is a great example from the oil and gas industry, right? So you guys from the oil and gas can set up either in your refineries, you can set them up in the oil fields, and it can serve a multitude of purposes. It's not just data, it can be voice, it can be safety, it can be sensors, it can be whatever. So there is all types of applications. It's not limited when it comes to the kinds of data you're pushing, and you have the robustness of LTE and the easy use of LTE when it comes to phones, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, you see things like inbuilt in cellular. So if you did want to provide in, for example, a space like this, you could provide an in-building solution, put up some base stations, some CBRS base stations, and you would be either augmenting an existing carrier, perhaps the city might want to do it, perhaps the venue owner might want to do it, perhaps a little bit of all. So you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to the kinds of verticals and use cases that you can employ. The Alliance itself, we are a classic industry association. And sorry about the eye chart. It's gotten worse over the years, which is a good thing for us. We're now at 190 member companies. So even in the week it took to make this slide, we've added 4 more companies, including a couple of the folks you see here on the show floor. General Electric, MDS joined us. Also the 4RF folks joined us, and you won't see them listed up here. My apologies to our newest members, but you see quite the rogues gallery of usual suspects and unusual suspects. So you see the big infrastructure companies like Nokia or Ericsson. You see Motorola, but then you also see companies like Google, Facebook. And then as you drill down in here, you see all the carriers, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, the cable operators, Cox, Charter, Spectrum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the list here is really representative of how diverse the interest is in the ecosystem that we're creating. It goes from top to bottom. Equipment vendors, it goes service providers, it goes et cetera. So there's really, from our perspective, a way to address all of the different players in the ecosystem. So from the launch, the timeline for CBRS, the original rulemaking or discussions started back about 2010 with the FCC, Department of Defense. And since then, the growth and the evolution of what has become OnGo and CBRS, we're now talking about hundreds of thousands of base stations. There's, of course, different technologies, different RANs that are out there. But just to give you a sense that the band is being used, both in the GAA and the PAL, there's 2 different power categories. There's indoor and outdoor that are in use, and those use cases that I discussed a moment ago. So the kinds of numbers from the ecosystem that you'll see as well, if you look in the list of devices from an end user perspective, are well over 270 devices. Laptops, phones, modems, routers, dongles, chipsets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the heart of the system, the spectrum access system, those administrators, there's currently 6 administrators, and those folks are the ones that are really the center point to make this all work. That's the mechanism that really makes the access to the spectrum available. To deploy a base station, you need to have somebody called a Certified Professional Installer, CPI. The reason for this is so that the SAS can do its job, it has to know exactly where that base station is located. Otherwise, it can't figure out what's interfering with it potentially or give it its channel assignment. So the CPI is a person, an individual person, who validates where that installation was done. There's a mechanism to let them identify the physical, geographic location and the height above terrain. And then finally, LTE has been our bread and butter. That's what we started with, but 5GNR is rapidly approaching the CBRS band. So we're going to start seeing the 5G deployments, I think, tick up pretty quickly now, especially as hopefully we're pulling out of the COVID days. So this should be something that we see rapid acceleration. From the point of view of the Alliance, we do a series of releases of our specs. We've just completed what we term release 4, roughly 1 per year since we started this, and starting on release 5 next. A big part of what's in release 3 and release 4 is the support for 5G. So finally, just a little more detail on the certifications. Formally, if you go to the FCC website and you look at the end user devices, you will see 245 unique listings. There are also a large number of rebranded products that bring us up to about 270, 275. So there are things that augment that number. From the point of view of the base stations, in our vernacular, a CBSD, because remember, telco next to the military we're the best at coming up with acronyms. So CBSD is a CBRS device or a base station. There are currently 138 different CBSDs that have gone through FCC certification. Now actually 60, not 59, of which have completed what we call OnGo certification, which is what the Alliance supports. So verticals, when we talk about use cases and verticals, the list is as long as you want to make it. Our expectations before COVID, we expected to see things like hospitality, entertainment, commercial real estate. COVID changed the playing field. So we began to see things like healthcare, logistics, education, but also now that COVID is hopefully again getting in the rearview mirror, our ideas for the original use cases are beginning to reappear. So hospitality, hotels, entertainment venues, sports arenas, et cetera, now beginning to be part of this. Government also, different cities, different municipalities, different school systems entering into this as well. Finally, getting close here to handing over to the really interesting part, which is a more of a demonstration of a use case. When we talk about the priority access licenses, the auction that took place back in September, to give you an idea, raised about $4.5 billion. So not the same kind of numbers that you would see in the auctions for spectrum from the carriers and the traditional operators, but still quite remarkable because we're talking about a real diversity of winning bidders here. This goes from small power companies, small school districts, small consortia of rural carriers, et cetera, bidding on these licenses. And so that list is pretty exhaustive. There's something like 200 and some odd different entities winning auction licenses. And then finally, the Alliance itself, while we are a standards development body, we write specifications. We do a lot of other things as well. So we write at our booth that's up on the corner. One of the things you can pick up is we completed OnGo for Dummies. We worked with Wiley Publishers to do a classic Dummies book. And it's to get you off the ground. It's to give you the basic language, to give you the basic insights so that you can then begin building from there. Our website also contains other documents that are very useful. We have deployment guides that explain the greater details, sort of aimed at the CIO world to help them understand, what do I need to plug in? What are the pieces of the puzzle? And then our certification program. And we also, because this is a different world, there's an element in LTE deployments where you need a network identifier. You need to be able to say, this is who I am as a network. If you tried to get a network identifier as an individual, as a small company, as a whatever, it is not a trivial process. So what we did as an alliance is we went and got a network identifier to let our members share. So now through the alliance, you can quickly, in about 10 minutes, using an online form, request a network identifier that you can then use for your deployment. So you remove that other roadblock and that other step that you have getting in your way of doing a deployment. So that's something, again, very quick, very simple. If you try to do it through the traditional processes, it can take months. Through this process, it can take minutes. You can literally have it that quickly. And then, we talk a little bit about global. So one of the things that when this alliance was formed, it was known as Cbrs Alliance. For us, Cbrs means this specific band, 3.5 gigahertz, 150 megahertz of spectrum in the US deploying LTE. what we quickly recognized was that this is not just a phenomenon that's happening here. This is happening globally. So the evolution to something greater is what was needed. And that's why you see the term OnGo Alliance. OnGo is about the global deployment of shared spectrum. The three-tiered sharing mechanism that you see in CBRS is arguably the most complex use case. You got the military, you got a couple of other tiers, et cetera. So it's very complicated in that regard. We cracked that case. So carrying that solution on to simpler and bands that don't have the military necessarily involved, much easier. But the same concepts are useful. So evolving to this idea of sharing the knowledge that we have gained has been a real important part of our evolution as an industry association. This needs to go beyond just one band in one country. This needs to be any band that a government has identified for sharing anywhere in the world. And then again, why OnGo? Oh, I think I'm about to step on somebody. I said, that doesn't look familiar, but I'm a professional, so I can talk to any slide that's put up on a screen. So actually, I'm going to introduce Miles. Miles from JMA, who is standing in for Kurt. Kurt unfortunately had some issues back at home and took off, and Miles stepped in. So Miles.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it. Yeah, Kurt had some power challenges in Chicago, so you get me. Thank you. All right. So why OnGo? From a standpoint of high capacity, it's a 3.5 gigahertz range. So you're able to send and receive a large volume of data. It's a bigger pipe. So the capacity is very important when you're deciding what use cases you want to deploy using the spectrum in partnership with the OnGo ecosystem. It's control. So one of the challenges we're all faced with is how we're able to deploy it, where we deploy it, and when we deploy it. When you own your network and you're leveraging the ecosystem, you're able to make those decisions to bring your use cases to life. Security. So the OnGo Alliance is built on the 3GPP standards and protocols, adds to them, and you're able to have very secure connections. So in critical infrastructure, it's very important to have security, and it's built in with the ecosystem as well. In addition to the inherent security of a private network and using 3GPP standards, you have the ability to add additional layers of security into your network, having everything completely on-prem, managing filtering, whatever you want to do, you have those permission controls. Reliability. So Alan mentioned the part of what they do is they certify, OnGo Alliance certifies the endpoint devices as well. So whenever you take them out of the box, you connect them, they work. And that's what you expect to happen, is that it works. They're flexible, and using the ecosystem is flexible. So you're flexible in how you deploy it. So you could prioritize different use cases, prioritize your user equipment. You have flexibility as to where you put it. If you've got coverage gaps, you have control, and you're able to leverage the flexibility that the ecosystem provides. And I buried the lead a little bit with a path to 5G. So, we all hear 5G in the media. We've heard it for years. It's real. It's either here or coming, and there's a path to it with the ecosystem. And I'll touch on the rest of the points as we go through it. So let me close this slide real quick with it's an additive choice, right? So when we're talking about CBRS, we're talking about OnGo Alliance. It's not the only thing. It's not the silver bullet. It's something that's in your toolbox that you're able to leverage to bring to life important use cases and solve problems. Okay, so a couple points on the ecosystem. The applications and platforms. Ultimately, whenever you're collecting all the information from your endpoints, you've got to do something with that data, and you've got to have really good applications and platforms in order to do that, to make it easy to manage the data and automate what you want to do. That's built into the ecosystem. On the lower portion, you've got system integrators and service providers. So you heard some of the big players mentioned from service providers. And then also you've got to be able to bring together all of the disparate systems so that it works seamlessly. And that's where the system integrators come into play. From a service provider perspective, you've got the large operators. You could do private networks. You could also do managed service offerings too, complete turnkey solutions where you don't have to solve all the problems and figure out all the variables and how to bring it to life. The previous session, there was a lot about the SaaS, the Spectrum Access System. They've got them all, right? So the traffic cop of the CBRS Spectrum is available, a part of the ecosystem, and it makes deployments and management of the network extremely easy. On the right-hand side, we've got the devices and users. So it spans everything from voice to data, broadband, whatever you're looking for. And there's a very robust network and ecosystem of the device itself. If you're not collecting information, if you're not having the endpoint that's communicating effectively, your network's not going to do or live up to the potential that's there. And then finally, in the middle there, it's the RAN. So the radio access network, there's multiple options in how you deploy your RAN. You could leverage individual access points. You could deploy pure fixed wireless, or you could have a hybrid of both of those where you have a multi-service radio system, all available, part of the ecosystem, easy to navigate, and you could build together a comprehensive solution. Oops. I made the screen go black and I don't know how I did that. Okay, got it. Perfect, thank you. I missed the tutorial or I wasn't paying enough attention, one of the two. All right, so flexible and scalable. In the deployments that we've done and what we see in the field today, the scalability is one of the first things that come to mind in all the conversations we have and how we design the network. So the question is, okay, great. We have an idea of what we're looking for tomorrow, but what about 3 years and 5 years down the road? One of the biggest benefits that we get with CBRS and the OnGo Alliance is the scalability. So you could add additional coverage and capacity very easily and add it on your existing network to serve the different areas or expand to meet the different needs of the use cases in the future. Part of the flexibility comes in on the deployment approach for your data services. So you could have it completely on-prem, you could have hybrid, or you could do it completely in the cloud, right? So you get to choose between all of those. It may, you may want everything completely private for very secure information that you're transmitting over your network, or it's less secure, kind of, best effort type information. You want to push it all to the cloud. You can deploy it whichever way you want. Again, all part built into the ecosystem. Now on the right side, you could see it spans in building all the way out to the field. So it works very well in building, and it also works very well out in the field. So you can have that seamless user experience that crosses all the different areas in the environment that you're deploying in, because environmental considerations are very important as you're architecting, deploying, and managing your network. Okay, so build for outcomes. So everything we do, we try and design the network to deliver on an outcome, right? It's cool. We all like to talk tech and get into the weeds and be the nerds that we kind of are. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is deliver on the outcome. And so what you're able to do is to begin with the outcome in mind and then architect for it. And then you have a modular system you can modify down the road. But a couple examples here. There we go. There's the pointer. All right. So you could deploy, as I said before, both public and private. You could have it connecting to both, sending your data whichever way you want to send it to. And then you could decide in where your data is going through, how it runs through the network and connects back to the cloud. So you could have your traditional mobile experience, your cell phones, your tablets, your laptops, all of it built in. You could dual connectivity, carrier aggregation. You could build in redundancy, failover. It all depends on how critical that application is. You could roll it in your private network, right? Your SCADA controls, your critical elements within the field. So site access control, AR, VR, maintenance, and worker safety, right? Some of the most important things that we do every day. You could have a hybrid too between your internal communication, safety, and security, right? There's all kinds of different stuff. I'll talk a little bit about AI and edge compute and how that ties into it. And then if you need to extend your range, right? It doesn't make sense to build out your private network into a very far area that really nothing happens, but sometimes assets may go out there and you want to track them. That's a great application for incorporating a public network. So leveraging some of the macro sites that are out there. So with all of this, you're able to determine within the network how you prioritize the data, right? So if you want to prioritize your safety and security and your internal communications, which usually you do, then you're able to do that into the system. You could build it through QoS. You could even dedicate particular swaths of your spectrum. So because of the way CBRS is built up into the 10 megahertz bands, you're able to segment out even portions of that 10 megahertz bands and dedicate it specific to use cases. So if you have critical applications you want to dedicate your spectrum to, you're able to do that using CBRS with the OnGo ecosystem. So talk a little bit more about use cases, right? So we do everything with the end in mind. So worker productivity is one of the first use cases that comes to mind. Whoops, get that mute button down. All right, so vehicle mountain Wi-Fi. You could essentially turn your vehicle into a mobile office, right? You want to connect your workers, you've got your endpoints that are out in the field today, you don't want to rip and replace all of those, they're already Wi-Fi capable. You could mount a CBRS backhaul router, like Cradlepoint or other ones that are out there today, or Multitech, of course, and you're able to create a mobile working office in the truck or the vehicle. You could have a mobile workforce. So that's using your cell phones, your tablets that are already CBRS capable, probably, leveraging the infrastructure you've deployed to enable your mobile workforce. So think of anything that they're doing manually today. If they're using pen and paper, then you could easily turn that into a digital form and build it into and use CBRS to send the information back and forth. All right, digital transformation. I mentioned digital forms a minute ago. Also report automation. So reporting leakage, any other type of reports that are out there that you want to have automated, you could build it all into it. And then again, going back to the platforms that make all the data usable and actionable, you tie it back to the platform and then you bring it into a single pane of glass, or you give it to the people that really want to have it. Safety and security. So the video analytics. So whenever you think about video, it's not just a camera taking pictures or a video, recording something happening. Ultimately, it's information. And so you could take that information, you could do things with it. If you want to set up a boundary detection around a secure site, you're able to do that. And so instead of having somebody looking at a bank of screens, you could set up an easy algorithm. Systems are out there today. There's a whole bunch of them. When somebody penetrates that boundary, because you're using the video camera as a sensor, you backhaul via CBRS, then you're getting an alert to your security force that, hey, there's somebody where they shouldn't be. You could also build that into a whole bunch of other things from worker safety perspective. So in the COVID days, which we are still in, unfortunately, if you need to have spacing requirements, so the 6-foot spacing, you could build that into an edge compute platform, use your video camera as a sensor, and then receive alerts whenever those particular rules are getting violated, so that you could help improve the safety and security of your workforce. And then remote controllers and automated alerting. So ultimately what we're trying to do is improve our operational efficiency, right? And the outcomes, right? We want to be more efficient with what we do and what we invest. And whenever you're able to remotely monitor, receive proactive alerts, and control remotely, you're able to improve your operational efficiency. All right, additional edge solutions. So I mentioned before, let's see, asset tracking I talked about, right? So you could leverage CBRS, you could leverage CBRS with your private network, you could go extend your range, you could use commercial networks, whatever you want to do. But ultimately, there's a lot of man hours that are wasted trying to find high value equipment that are required to do a job. So if you quickly locate those assets and tie them to the worker that needs them, then that improves your operational efficiency. Video surveillance I talked on, storage monitoring. So as you're extracting things from the ground and storing them, managing that, monitoring it proactively and getting real-time data feeds is extremely valuable. Maintenance, training, and safety. So I mentioned it's a very high throughput spectrum band. So at 3.5, you're able to send and receive a lot of information at one time. So you could deploy VR and AR. So I know we've seen a lot of videos out there about VR and how you could use that. Well, augmented reality, AR, is really good for training. And as we continue to make sure that everybody's trained in doing what they should be doing safely, it becomes a very important tool in your toolbox. And it becomes real. With 3.5, with CBRS and OnGo, it's got the throughput requirements needed to make that happen. And you could deploy compute at the edge as well if you need that. So you could always move the compute anywhere within the network you want to compute on the data to provide the outcome you're looking for. All right. Workflow integration, I talked a little bit about that. Remote site coverage. So one of the biggest issues that we're faced with is we don't have coverage in particular areas. So an oil well out in the middle of the Gulf is one really good example, or it could be in the desert somewhere, wherever. If you don't have coverage, when you have control over where and how you deploy your network, you can make those decisions, invest, and have the connectivity you need to generate the outcomes you're looking for. And then monitoring, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, right? So it's all proactive alerts. You've been collecting data for decades in the industry. So it's how can you do it efficiently, bring it all to a single pane, and then take action on it. All right, so you've probably heard this before, but there's a very high demand for CBRS. You heard a little bit about it a minute ago. It's the truth, right? We had 228 PAL holders right now, record number. Normally, you're looking at about 50. So that gives you a little bit of the scale as to how much value is seen in this spectrum. It's high throughput, high capacity, a lot of flexibility built into it. Secondary market, authorized by the FCC. So it's very light touch. It's very easy if you need to sublet a PAL license to augment any GAA that you're using. So ultimately, you can get the spectrum you need when you need it very easily, which is not something you could usually say about the federal government, especially the FCC. Don't tell them I said that. Energy sector PALs. It's funny, actually, we saw this one in the last session. So there's just a couple examples of energy companies out there that have invested in CBRS, and it's shown through their PAL license holdings. So as mentioned in the previous session too, if they're not leveraging the PAL licenses, they go back to GAA, right? So they don't just get held there and not used, they get reallocated and used nearly real time. All right, so one of the questions you're asking yourself is, okay, cool, I get it, I understand what it is, how do I determine where it's a good fit? So one of the things you want to think about is, where can I avoid cables, or where do I not like having cables? Do I have assets that need to be connected that are connected with via cable today that I want to be able to move around and have that flexibility? That could be a use case. Another one is, where is current connectivity not working as needed? So, you could have a connectivity in a location that maybe just doesn't have the throughput required for the application you're looking to deploy. So it's an assessment that you make over your current network position and say, okay, I'm good here, I don't need to augment, but where are the places that would make sense for me to augment with a higher throughput capacity? What projects fail due to connectivity? So project failures aren't really a bad thing. It just means you learned something, right? And in many cases, you've learned that you just don't have the connectivity you need to bring the use case to life. So go back 3-5 years and say, what did we try and do that was a really good idea that we couldn't really deliver on because we didn't have the connectivity we needed? CBRS could be a way to do it in private wireless. And then 5G, of course, right? So we're building everything for the future, right? You don't invest for tomorrow, you invest for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And you want to think about, what's the vision, what's the technology roadmap, and how am I going to get there? And is private wireless a good fit? Where is it going to fit? And specifically for 5G, as that continues to evolve, where do I need to deploy that? All right, a little bit more about 5G. Not that you haven't seen enough commercials on it. So OnGo Alliance has CBRS standards and support for 5G, right, with 3GPP. So it's 5G ready. So look at the top, and for those of you that aren't in the depth of it, so band 48, that's 4G, right? Band 48, that's CBRS. In 48, that's new radio 48. So all that means is that's using the same band spectrum, but running 5G on it, right? So that happens today. We have this live in the field today. The OnGo ecosystem also works with other 3GPP, 4G, and 5G bands, right? From low band to millimeter wave. And this is with carrier aggregation and dual connectivity or dual connectivity. So a couple examples. So what we've done is we've used band 48 as an anchor band and then tied it together with other 5G NR bands. You could also do in 48, right? So you're using 5G with CBRS and tying that to other 5G bands, specifically millimeter wave. So if you want super high throughput, ultra low latency, you could use CBRS as your anchor band and then build that on top of it, right? So you continue to build onto your network to deliver on the use case you're looking to deliver on. And then finally, we have one with N48 and other 4G LTE. So you can mix and match whichever way you want. a lot of flexibility. So here's a couple examples. This is a DoD example. So we did a session for the DoD, and the federal government loved it because we're able to show that 5G is real, right? We've got a roadmap, we've got a pathway, and it works. And then we were able to show multiple gigabit speeds leveraging CBRS as an anchor band and tying it to millimeter wave. And it's all brought to life because of the ecosystem. So 1.5 gigs down, that's a good thing. I think that's it. We'll open it up for questions, hand it back to Alan. We love questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the question was, can you give us an idea of the cost of SaaS services? So from the Alliance, I have the very politically correct answer for you, which is that contracting with your SaaS is really up to each individual provider. We don't get involved as the Alliance in the business relationships between our members. So it is a little bit of a sensitive area, but it's also that way they don't have to worry about somebody dictating that to them. There's different business models, and if you ask folks that have deployed, you may find that one SaaS provider is tuned to this business model and another is tuned to a different business model. So, and that really was the advantage in a way when the FCC conceptualized this, is to create competition. So it wasn't just one entity or whatever that was trying to provide the service. It was creating a competitive market so that you could go out there and do a little bit of shopping. So my answer to your direct question is no. But the more politically correct part is really, you do need to go shopping, because depending on the scale of your deployments, the type of your deployments, you've got a nice supermarket to go check out. Yeah, exactly. And how to monetize the expense of that, is really dependent upon each individual deployment. So you as an individual person may want to deploy CBRS in your home, which you can do, and your relationship with a SaaS is going to be quite different than it would be with a utility or a large oil producer energy company. So it really is, it's meant to be as flexible as possible.
So yes, and I know CapEx is generally the preferred method. It's available. So if you work with a SaaS, you could use a system integrator. Absolutely, it's a way to approach it. You could build the whole thing as CapEx. You could build the whole thing as OpEx. It's completely flexible. Money's fungible, as I've been told before. What other questions? Great question. Yeah. Okay. Sure. The question is, how would we learn about sublease options available?
Yeah. So the secondary market is just getting off the ground. So there's going to be, the SaaS itself will be one of those outlets for that information. I believe, though I can't say definitively, it looks like there will also be other brokers for Spectrum. So stay tuned as a new member of the Alliance. You'll be able to keep up with that information as we make it, as we know it, we'll share it, of course. So. Yeah, well, thanks everybody. We really appreciate your attendance.
Thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today in the presentation here with the conference. And the association has made a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project in the name of all of our presenters. And so we do appreciate that. And if you just take a moment, scan the QR code on your way out to provide feedback and of this presentation. And we do appreciate your time here this afternoon. Have a great show.